This is Reconstruction to Jim Crow, Part 3. So today we're going to talk about lynching. Lynching seemed to be the go-to mode of punishment for African Americans in the South in the 1880s through the 1930s. So from 1889 to 1932, some 3,745 people, all black men, were lynched in the South. This is really common. Murder without trial, meaning they did something that a white person perceived to be wrong, they were accused of something, or maybe they actually did something, and they would be in jail, and a mob would come get them out of jail and just hang them. And oftentimes they're usually not caught. They don't get tried or convicted for the murder. So let's take a look at the reasons for lynching. Okay, so this is 1882 to 1968. Homicides, which is a reason for lynching. Now, mind you, keep in mind this could be accused homicides, so they may not necessarily have done that. So it's 1,937 lynchings, so that would be 40% of the homicides. Felonious assault, so that would be a serious assault, harm to another person. So 205, 4%. Rape. Now, keep in mind, this could be accused rape, okay? A lot of times they didn't have proof, and a lot of white women would use this against a black person that they felt wronged them. So that would be 912, 19%. Attempted rape, 288. And some other more minor would be robbery and theft. They would lynch you for it, 232. An insult to a white person. So if you remember our last discussion, we talked about how African Americans could not look white people in the eye. They couldn't look at a white woman. If they had to step down off the curb if a white person was walking by. So any perceived insult to a white person. And take a look at these numbers, 1,084 lynchings. That's for other causes, I'm sorry, 85 lynchings. So 1% was for just an insult. Other causes are 1,000. So in total, from 1882 to 1968, there was 4,743 lynchings. So this is a big deal. It was definitely a huge, huge issue. So we're going to look at some of the examples that happened. So this one is a mob in Tennessee hangs a young Negro. He was taken from the jail by unmasked men, so they didn't even hide who they were, and they forced the sheriff to go with them. Okay, so not sure what this gentleman was accused of, but this was in Dover, Tennessee. Mr. Bell was taken from jail. Local authorities planned to request the governor, Austin Peay, to use his state officers to aid in the investigation. They decided to not wait for that, and they went ahead and just lynched him. The sheriff estimated that there were 75 men in the band that entered the jail that seized him, and they hung him, and while he was hanging, they shot him a lot. And this is not an unfamiliar way. We're going to look at another incident here in a minute. It was very similar. So, Robertson County, August 30th, 1880, Leonidas LaPrade. Supposedly he had some money, and he had it hidden. And so men found him and they tortured him to try to find the money. And it was a mob. 10 black men were arrested because of this. 2 of them were lynched, and 5 of them went to trial. So the trial was February 14th, 1881. And February 18th, so 4 days later, the mob took the men and hanged them from the balcony. Now, what balcony are we talking about? We're talking about the Springfield courthouse balcony. So they made it really, really public. So when this happened, the Tennessee General Assembly, they got together and they made a law because there started to be a theme of mobs going into the jails and taking people from the jails, and the sheriff's just letting them do it. And so Tennessee General Assembly made a law that said that it was unlawful for a sheriff to allow people to enter his jail and take a prisoner from it. But here's the catch. Yes, it's unlawful, but the sheriff is only charged of a misdemeanor. The guys that were taken from him were killed. Sheriff's only charged of a misdemeanor. So I don't know how weighty they wanted that to be. So here's another one. April 22nd, 1901. John Hicks was a farmer that was killed, and he was killed by Wyatt Mallory, an African American. So Wyatt Mallory was arrested. Okay, and while he was awaiting trial, once again, a mob came in and they took him from the sheriff's office and they hung him from the balcony. And just like the first gentleman that we heard about, while he was hanging, they shot him. So this was the last hanging from the balcony at Robertson County Courthouse, but it shows you a theme. So what did they do about it? This is Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells was born a slave. She ended up becoming a Memphis school teacher and a journalist. Her friend was lynched, and that really hit home for her. And so she became a lifelong crusader against lynching. And she founded the Anti-Lynching Society. She is known for saying one had better die fighting against injustice than die like a dog or a rat in a trap, right? So this article here is written by Ida B. Wells. I'm going to put this slideshow in Schoology so you'll be able to take a closer look at it. But it's talking about, this is 3 years into her anti-lynching society, and she's encouraging the members of her anti-lynching society to hold true. Unfortunately, it was not until the 1960s that lynching officially became illegal. You would think that making it illegal to murder would be enough. Sadly, it was not. So, 1919. So we just talked about some of the lynchings that happened ending in 1901. In 1919, you start seeing this summer, they call it the Red Summer. And what happened was there was a lot of riots going on. So let me set the scene for you. You're starting to see a economic decline. So we're not talking like crazy like the Depression, but people were losing their jobs, okay? And African Americans were starting to do really well for themselves. In one particular area, they had like their own Black Wall Street. They were upper middle class. They were doing fantastic, right? They're creating their own culture, and we'll dive into this as we talk about the Harlem Renaissance. But in 1919, you see this economic downturn, and you start seeing people that were looking for jobs. People are starting to go hungry. And so they're starting to look at these African Americans that are doing well and had jobs, and they're getting mad. So over the summer of 1919, you have 26 riots. Some of the major riots were in Chicago and Washington, D.C., Nebraska, Arkansas, and New Orleans, Knoxville, and Nashville, Tennessee. Okay, so here's an image of the race riots and something I want to tell, a story I want to tell you about. And we're going to look at in class a memorial from this particular riot. Can't think off the top of my head where it was at. I think it was Springfield, Illinois. Springfield riots, yes. And this is where that Black Wall Street was that I was telling you about. And so they had this whole really successful area of African Americans, this whole section of the city there where they had really nice houses, where they had really flourishing businesses and banks. And like this was a really nice area of town, right? And during that summer, there was a riot. Somebody felt like an African American had assaulted a white woman, and as a result, they blamed this African American. And once again, the guy's put in jail. He's taken from jail, and he wasn't taken. He was going to be taken. So the sheriff at the time was like, okay, we can't let this happen. So he went and hid the African American that was going to be tried. And as a result, the mob, who doesn't have anybody to take their anger out on, they take it out on this African American area of town, and they burn it to the ground. So they killed like 40 people, destroyed homes. I mean, it was pretty bad. So what is the African American response to these riots? One, they retaliate. They fight back. You know, you're starting to see, and you'll really see it when you talk about the Harlem Renaissance, you're starting to see this new African American pride, all right? You're starting to see the first generation of African Americans that are born free, becoming adults, and there's this new pride in who they are. And so they're like, no, we're not gonna just lay around and let this happen. We're gonna fight back. Also, they migrated north. It's the Great Migration. We're going to talk about that here shortly. And they also held nonviolent protests. And we'll see a lot of that in the civil rights movement. I'm going to introduce you to W.E.B. Du Bois. He is the founder of the NAACP. So the NAACP is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And so it's a group that helps stand up for the rights of African Americans. And so you've got a bunch of attorneys. They're still around today. They take on any case where a minority is being discriminated against. So he's the guy that found it. This is a quote from him. "If we are to die in God's name, let us not perish like bales of hay." He's basically saying bales of hay, they just go up in flames quickly, right? And they die out quickly. He's like, no, if we're gonna die, we're gonna die fighting. We're gonna fight this, and we're not gonna just lay down and say that it's okay. So our next stage in African American history is where we start looking at African Americans fighting back.